We have another story going to the church, and for that, we're going to throw it over to our Vatican Rome correspondent, Michael Haynes. How have you been, Michael?
Not too bad, thank you, Murray. Not too bad. Enjoying the Christmas peace, but good to be back in action, as it were, back in Rome again.
Yeah, indeed. Christmas time it's praise God. It's such a good time of the year, and you're back in Rome. So this is an interesting time of the church. Outside of it just being Christmas time, we have there's a lot of stuff going on in the news and a lot of expectation really about this upcoming event, which is the newest consistory. So I want to take a step back, Michael. We're talking about it here on this show, the consistory, a lot, but can you sort of break down what is a consistory to begin with? what is the what is the effect on the curia that these usually have? Does this mean anything at all? And is this somewhat of a new thing, or is this something that's been going on in the curia for a long time?
Sure. So we have two kinds of consistories. We have an extraordinary consistory, of which this is one, and then we have the ordinary consistory, which is where the cardinals are created, and that's the one we're typically more used to seeing, at least in recent years. Pope Benedict did not hold an extraordinary consistory. Pope Francis held one in 2014 when we saw the Casper proposal pushed through. Then he held another in 2022, but essentially it was more of a briefing session. So the consistories are occasions for the cardinals to come together to discuss the issues with one another, but perhaps more crucially to discuss them with the Pope. And coming from different parts of the world, they'll give a little bit more nuance, a little bit more interest, if you like, to certain issues in the world, which he's not going to hear in the day-to-day because he's just surrounded by the Roman Curia. So they really provide a great opportunity for the Pope to listen to his closest advisors, who the cardinals should be. And that's why there is such interest in this particular consistory, because we've not seen these events run as they ought to be really for many years, because Pope Francis exerted a lot of control over the debates. They weren't really debates, they were more, as I said, briefing sessions. So that's why many cardinals actually mentioned at the conclave or in the general congregations just before the voting that they wanted the return of the consistories. They wanted to have more involvement, more input, so that they could approach the Pope, and to move away from that kind of leadership we saw under Pope Francis, where the councillors who were allowed access to him were essentially that group of the C9 cardinals, so a very small selected group. And that number changed somewhat depending on who was in favour and who was out of favour. So it should be, I think, a very interesting event, a real first major test also of the style of his governance, because it's just after the Holy Year is finished, and many people are saying, well, this is perhaps the first occasion for him to show his own style of papacy, after having concluded the diary that he inherited from Pope Francis.
I think this is taking me back to the conclave, because I remember there was immediately all this reaction and analysis about the different potential factions that were going on there in Rome, among the cardinals, and I do think it's a difficult thing to categorize each one of these cardinals. I'm not even sure that's very appropriate to be putting them into sort of different factions, especially when there's so many more factors at play than just an ideological one. But I do think there is very clear divides in the church on theology, especially moral theology, the liturgy. Firstly, do you see there as being the majority of cardinals will end up showing up to this? Do you see this as being a time for them to sort of lobby as groups, as factions within the church? Who do you think has the upper hand going into this consistory? What kind of faction is looking better, do you think, just judging from the Vatican politics going into this?
I suppose, if any, the cardinals who are already based in Rome will be somewhat of given an advantage, because they will see each other day to day. But interestingly enough, the consistory is going to be run slightly in the style that we saw with the synod, in that the cardinals will be divided into working groups. Now, this was news broken by the Vatican reporter Nico Spontoni. There are no details as to how those working groups will be made up. Perhaps it will be fairly basic and the division will be based on language groups. But that will lead, I think, to quite a one-sided division because the Germans will be there doing the German thing, being quite heretical in the corner. The American bishops will be there with maybe the English cardinals, and so I think that whole style of division, rather than having the cardinals just address each other and the whole assembly, is quite poor and going to be quite unsatisfactory. So, as for the various factions, we've seen the themes be quite vague in one sense. The cardinals have been told to prep for synodality for topics on the liturgy, as well as Predicati Evangelium and Evangelii Gaudium. I think realistically, the synod and the liturgy are the two topics that will be the most prominent. The liturgy, I think everybody's really thinking that's going to be related to the traditional mass, although it's not been said in as many words. With synodality, I think that could be quite interesting because it could be a test for Leo to actually show how he's going to move forward or not with the synod, given we have another 3 years of that implementation phase. And as for the strong voices, I think it could come down to, in a sense, who has the stronger character in the small groups, who comes with the most eloquently prepared speech that's not overly long, but is interestingly written with enough passion to convey his argument, but not too much to put people off. I think it could be very interesting, especially given that it's actually fairly short, and the church is so divided, really, although the cardinals said after the conclave that they're not divided, but the church itself is facing immense division.
Yeah, and this point is something that I'm not sure the traditional Catholic movement is sort of internalized yet in terms of this being a tremendous opportunity and one that I find kind of surprising, honestly. I'm surprised that if what we're seeing is what it ends up being, which is that this is going to be a discussion about the traditional Latin Mass, a potentially more guidelines in regards to the Novus Ordo Mass as well. This we could see, I think, some substantial change that ends up occurring here.
Hey everyone, Murray here. The Consistory is going on right now, and if you want the latest information on it with on-the-ground reporting from Michael Haynes and commentary from all of our Pelican Brief writers, you're going to want to get a Pelican membership. You can use code MURRAY, that's M-U-R-R-A-Y, you get a discount on it. You get access to our prayer app, which is the traditional version of some of these other Catholic prayer apps out there. You've got all of these content creators, Kennedy Hall, Dr. Kwasniewski, all of their content there on Pelican. You can get a membership today.
Now, what I want to dig a little deeper on that. There's been a lot of discussion in recent days about the potential solutions that can be done here. There was an interview that Diane Montagna produced where it was sort of revisiting this question of a traditional ordinariate or and there's been many different ways of putting it, personal prelatures, traditional ordinariate. On the ground, are you seeing this sort of being a buzz in Rome? Do you see that as being something that Pope Leo, just judging from his character, might be open to, or what do you think is going through the heads of the cardinals and the popes at the moment concerning the possible solutions for the traditional Latin Mass? And do you personally see there as being a solution that could come out of this consistory?
It's a really interesting question. I think there's different parts there. As for the reality on the ground, so Diane Montagna's interview, also she got advice and input from Father Raffray from the Institute of the Good Shepherd, and they do have a strong presence here, and they're very involved in the traditional events here. So that, I think, says a lot for the fact that this is obviously something that has been discussed by those various superiors. It's a move which I have seen various commentators, including our own Dr. Kwasniewski, be quite wary of, for fear that it would essentially move the traditional movement into becoming, well, that a movement in a ghetto rather than just members of the church. And I think personally I would perhaps align with that concern. As for whether it's likely that we'll emerge from this consistory on Friday and have some new guidelines, I think perhaps that's unlikely. because there is so much division on this issue. I mean, Bishop Martin in the Diocese of Charlotte is probably such a case in point. But at the very least, I find it encouraging that the Pope has called this consistory so early in this new year, so shortly after the Jubilee year has finished. So it seems that although in July he was quite ignorant of the issues and the debate around the traditional Mass, it seems since then he has at least become aware of what a hot topic it is and the need to address it. And hopefully, by the grace of God, also he's been able to draw good fruit from his meetings with people like Cardinal Burke, the Bishop Schneider, and gain a little bit more of an idea of how to escape from the completely arbitrary and pointless crisis that we've been pushed into thanks to Traditionis Custodes. So I am certainly hopeful that some more positive benefit could come from this.
Yeah, I know there are many commentators that critique the sort of, well, we'll wait and see what Pope Leo will do. But I don't think we even need to wait and see. I think we have a pretty good idea of where Pope Leo is at. And it's somebody who is somewhat ignorant on these questions, somewhat uninformed about the issues going on in the traditional Latin Mass, the traditional movement. And he seems like he's having to be forced to take it all in. The traditional movement, when compared to the Catholic Church at large, is a relatively small faction within the Catholic Church. And so it's not surprising that Pope Leo, coming from his own background in Chicago and then South America, would be sort of unaware of some of these issues within the traditional movement. So it's a very interesting thing, Michael. We'll have to see what goes on in the consistory. As a final note, I want to talk a little bit about evangelization, because I know when you talked about the upcoming consistory, there was this notion of finding communion, finding mission. What areas of the church right now on a geographic scale do you think Pope Leo is focused on, and do you think this consistory is focused on? Will there be discussions about geopolitics? Of course, we've seen this issue with Venezuela pop up recently. We have tensions in the Middle East still going on, China and Taiwan. Do you think the cardinals are focusing on one particular region of the church and region of the world in this consistory, especially in regards to evangelization and the Catholic Church's relation with these different nations?
I think, especially given the proximity of this weekend's events, that could steer the conversation in a slightly different turn than had the consistory been before Christmas, for instance. It will be interesting to see what fruits, if you like, have come from the Jubilee in terms of what cardinals have seen and what they haven't seen in terms of nations represented and how they need to encourage the faith in different corners of the world. I know Pope Leo has spoken about how the Jubilee of Youth over the summer was quite an impressive event. And so there will, I'm sure, be talk about trying to engage young people. My hope is that that's done in a serious way and not in a slightly benign and sort of bizarre, weird way that it's been done in recent years. So I think, given what we saw during the conclave and the widespread variety of backgrounds that we've got with the cardinals now because of Pope Francis's choice of cardinals, I think the makeup of the College of Cardinals is going to have quite an effect on the consistory, in that a lot of these cardinals are coming without the, dare I say, the intellectual pedigree that cardinals of old used to have. And Cardinal Muller has lamented how bishops are appointed without the suitable degrees that they used to have of old. So that could, I think, lead to quite unsatisfactory and pointless efforts regarding evangelization. And to take the Jubilee again, we saw some very ridiculous, misguided things, such as the mascot, through that entire year. So I've not heard anything particularly that the cardinals are coming to Rome with XYZ on their mind regarding evangelization. But my hope would be that they would be prompted to take it seriously, and hopefully Pope Leo might have an effect in that regard, because his speeches can be quite Christocentric, can be a little bit more profound than those of his predecessor on occasions.
Yeah, definitely. And I even find them a bit more erudite as well. And maybe that might elevate some of the discussions. And again, I don't think it's going to be an ideal consistory. You're going to have bad actors at this consistory. And it does bring me back to the conclave when I was speaking to some of the cardinals and speaking to people who were speaking to the cardinals. There was a sort of bewilderment that many of them had, like they didn't know what was going on. They felt completely unprepared for some of these discussions. I think that's just the makeup of the College of Cardinals at the moment. So yeah, very interesting stuff, Michael. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next week then.
Good to be with you, Murray. Thank you very much.